Hi, I'm Arielle. On my birthday, the one they pretended was about me, I stood up and said my fiancé works at NASA. My sister laughed, loud. The room followed her lead, like they always do. They called it just a joke. But they never mailed his invitation. They deleted our photos from the family drive. They cut me from the slideshow. And when I found a letter my sister had hidden, a letter that could have saved a relationship I lost years ago, I realized this wasn't forgetfulness. This was a pattern, a system built to keep me small. So I brought proof. He walked in, badge and all, and the whole room fell silent. But the silence didn't heal anything. Why would a family go so far to erase one of their own? I parked just outside the gates, the gravel crunching beneath my tires like a warning. The Dunore estate hadn't changed. Not the string lights that looped perfectly between the oaks. Not the white chairs lined like soldiers awaiting command. And definitely not the way the air tensed the moment I stepped out of the car. It had been 9 months since I was last here. That wasn't a coincidence. I grabbed the gift bag from the passenger seat, a custom 3D model of a NASA probe, etched with Dad's name, and to the man who launched us all. It felt both too much and not enough. I tucked it under my arm, straightened my shoulders, and walked into the lion's den. Vera was the first to greet me. My mother's smile was always slightly delayed, as if she had to remember to show affection. "You're glowing," she said, brushing air against my cheek. "California suits you." "Thanks," I replied, knowing full well it wasn't a compliment. It was a reminder. I was the daughter who left. Callista glided in like she was hosting a presidential fundraiser, not a family gathering. "NASA, huh?" she said with a sharp grin. "Can't wait to meet your imaginary man." I forced a breath through my nose, said nothing. There wasn't a moment she wouldn't try to steal. Dinner was set beneath the arbor, linen tablecloths fluttering in the breeze. Harland, our father, stood at the head of the table, raising a glass. To family and to beginnings. Safe. Predictable. Then Callista stood. And to my baby sister, Arielle, who says her fiancé works at NASA. NASA, y'all! Laughter rippled around the table, like someone had spilled champagne into an electrical outlet. I smiled. I always smiled. But inside, I was 5 years old again, showing my first A-grade report card and being told not to brag. I was 16, making finals and state science fair, and told, "Don't forget to thank your teachers. It's not just you." Callista wasn't done. Of course she wasn't. She pulled something from behind her chair, laminated, hole-punched, and disturbingly colorful. "Let's play Arielle Bingo," she announced. "Mark a square every time she says, fiancé, NASA, satellite, or dreams bigger than this backyard." The table roared. Even Delaney, her daughter, giggled from her spot at the kids' table, not understanding she was watching her mother skin someone alive with charm. I stared at my plate. Potatoes, glazed carrots, the roast that Callista insisted be dry-aged. They didn't just laugh at him, I thought. They laughed at who I chose, what I believed in. They laughed at me. Callista wasn't done. "NASA?" she said, tilting her head. "Why not say he works at the White House, too?" A cousin choked on his wine. My aunt slapped the table. No one, not my mother, not my father, said a word to stop her. Silence is louder when it's from the people who were supposed to protect you. I excused myself, walked toward the garden wall where the light didn't quite reach. The music floated from the speakers like none of it had just happened. Behind the ivy, I leaned against cool stone and let the air leave my lungs in a slow, measured exhale. My phone buzzed. It was Gideon. "Still haven't received the invite." "Sure it's today?" My hands trembled as I stared at his message. But what shook me more was what Delaney whispered next. Delaney tugged on my sleeve so gently, I almost thought I imagined it. I looked down at her big eyes, still smudged with frosting from the cupcake she hadn't quite finished. "My mom says you make things up to feel important." She said it like she was reciting a bedtime fact, not to hurt, not to accuse, just to repeat something she'd overheard and stored in the same mental drawer as multiplication tables and Disney lyrics. I didn't flinch. I just nodded and told her, "Thanks for telling me," then stood still until she ran off. I stayed behind the ivy a moment longer, texted Gideon a simple, "It is today. And yes, I'm sure." Then I straightened my back, slipped my phone into my bag, and walked back toward the house. I wasn't ready to leave, not yet. And I certainly wasn't going to let them think I had. Inside, the air was thicker, laughter echoed in softer tones, and someone had dimmed the lights for ambiance. Guests milled around the cocktail room, balancing stemmed glasses and small plates. A few looked over at me and smiled politely, like I was someone's +1 they didn't quite remember. I caught Vera near the drinks table, her hands clasped like she'd been praying for good lighting all night. "Don't cause a scene," she said under her breath, her eyes fixed on a distant point beyond me. "Just laugh it off." "Laugh at what?" I asked, but she was already walking away. I barely had time to settle against a sidewall before Callista's voice rang out again. Wait, everyone! One last surprise for Arielle." The way she said my name made it sound like a punchline. She held up a small spiral-bound notebook, waving it like a prize. "I call it Arielle, Tales from Planet Fantasy, collected over the years." Some guests chuckled even before she opened it. "Age 9, she read, flipping a page. "Claimed her Barbie was admitted to Harvard. Swore she got the acceptance letter in the mail." Laughter. "Age 16, submitted an essay to the school newspaper and told the teacher it was too advanced for the student audience." More laughter. "It wasn't. It was mostly about space unicorns." I stood still. I didn't laugh. I didn't scowl. I simply existed, right there, right then, while the room giggled at stories I barely remembered. Stories I might have said half in jest, half in hope. Childhood moments twisted into comedy. "You've always been so creative," someone muttered behind me. I didn't turn to see who. Every word she read out felt like a page torn from a book I'd tried to rewrite for decades. My resume didn't matter. The thesis I submitted last fall? Pointless. In this room, I was still the girl with an overactive imagination and no seat at the grown-up table. They didn't laugh with me. They laughed because I once dared to believe I could be more. I tried to move, to say something, but the words caught in my throat, too dry and too raw. I needed air, or maybe I just needed distance. As I turned toward the hallway, heading for the powder room at the back of the house, a familiar little voice behind me whispered again, "My mom says no one really believes your fiancé is real." I paused. Not because I was surprised. I wasn't. But because she said it like it was Sunday school truth. Something she'd learned the same way you learn the Pledge of Allegiance. Through repetition, not reflection. I turned, looked at Delaney gently, and smiled. "I believe him," I said, "and that's enough." She blinked at me, unsure whether I was correcting her or confirming what she'd already decided. I walked away before she could answer. The powder room was dim, lined with wallpaper Callista probably picked out. Blue hydrangeas, predictable. I closed the door, locked it, leaned against the sink. My breathing was uneven, shallow. I tried to ground myself, listing planets, just like I did as a kid when I was nervous. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. But the tears were already in my throat. I didn't cry, not fully. Just felt the heat behind my eyes and the pressure in my jaw. In my mind, I was 16 again, sitting alone in the science lab, waiting for a teacher who never showed up to review my entry. I was 22, handing my father my first paycheck, and him asking if I planned to stick with this tech thing. I wiped my hands across my face, even though it was dry, then looked in the mirror. "I should have never come back," I whispered. But the mirror offered no rebuttal. There was a knock on the door, polite, not rushed. "Hey, Arielle," someone said softly. "They're getting ready for photos. Just a heads up." I didn't answer. Not right away. I wanted to stay locked in there until the night passed, but I also knew hiding wouldn't erase what had just happened, and they'd never stop erasing me if I didn't stop letting them. I waited until the footsteps faded. Then I unlocked the door, stepped out, and let the night pull me into its quiet. I wasn't ready to face anyone, but I also didn't want to disappear. Not this time. Most of the guests had moved back downstairs. The house had quieted into its post-party murmur, the kind of hush where no one wants to be the first to leave, but no one wants to stay either. I wandered without thinking, my feet moving through the upstairs hallway like they had somewhere specific to go. They didn't. The light from the study was still on. The door hung slightly ajar. I peeked in. No one. It felt unguarded, like something had been left open in more ways than one. Inside, the room smelled like cedar and expensive leather. Dad's desk sat where it always had, immovable and sterile. I scanned the surface, fingers brushing over the guest list binder Callista had clutched all week. It was open, a ribbon marking the RSVP page. I didn't mean to look, but I did. Neatly filed were each family name, each +1, each little check mark next to confirmed. I flipped the tabs slowly. My name was there. So was my mother's, my cousin's out-of-town girlfriend, even Aunt Rachel's bridge partner. But nowhere was Gideon. Not under G, not under my name, not scribbled in pencil. He hadn't been forgotten. He'd been excluded. Beside the binder was a sealed envelope, heavy cardstock, the kind with a gold-lined interior. I picked it up, turned it over. The wax was intact. The address? His? My handwriting. The RSVP card still inside. They never mailed it. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at that envelope, but I knew exactly what it meant. They didn't just doubt him, they never intended for him to be part of this night. I placed the envelope back in the drawer where I'd found it. Except when I did, it hit something. A box. Small, shoebox size, covered in floral fabric, the kind Callista would pick. Charming, but condescending. Curiosity got the better of me. I slid the box out and opened the lid. Photos, mostly. Old family snapshots, a few dried corsages. A napkin from our childhood kitchen printed with "God bless this home" in faded ink. I shifted through the clutter until something caught my eye. An envelope, not gold, not elegant, plain white. My name written on the front in shaky, slanted penmanship. I recognized it instantly. Aaron. I hadn't seen his handwriting in more than 10 years. But there it was. Just my name. No address, no postage. This letter had never gone through the mail. It had never left this house. I sat down. Hands trembling, I opened it. Arielle, it began. I waited at the cafe. I stayed past closing. I guess I was wrong to believe we were stronger than their silence. If you chose them, I hope they earned it. But if you didn't, if you never even got this, then I'm sorry I gave up before knowing for sure. I couldn't breathe. All those years, I thought he'd ghosted me, thought I was the fool for loving someone who didn't have the guts to stay. But he did show up, and someone, she, made sure I'd never know. This wasn't just about tonight. This wasn't just a missed invitation. This was a pattern. Every time I tried to bring someone into my life, to build something outside the mold they'd carved for me, someone in that house made sure it crumbled before it could matter. I folded the letter with deliberate care, as if by being gentle now, I could undo the damage then. I slid it back into its envelope, slipped it into my purse. My phone buzzed. It was Gideon. Hey, just double-checking. The party was tonight, right? I stared at his message, then at the still-sealed envelope on the desk. I didn't hesitate. Yes, I typed. And they made sure you'd never show up. I walked out of the study with the letter in my bag and a knot in my chest that no deep breath could loosen. Downstairs, the voices had shifted. The laughter was softer now, tinged with the syrupy exhaustion that settles after too much wine and too little sincerity. I took my time returning to the main hall, passing framed family portraits lining the hallway, each one meticulously staged over the years. Callista always stood at the center. I was either cropped out or barely visible at the edge, smiling like I belonged. The living room lights had been dimmed. Guests were settling into armchairs, small dessert plates in hand. Someone had lit candles, probably Callista. She had a flair for meaningful ambiance, the kind that photographs well but feels like a lie in real time. The giant flat screen flickered to life. Callista's voice rang out, too perky to be real. "Okay, everybody, settle in for a little Dunore journey through the years." Polite applause. I stayed near the back, close to the staircase. The first image filled the screen, a childhood birthday in the backyard, Harland at the grill, Vera holding a pitcher of lemonade, Callista grinning with her arm around a cousin. I remembered that day. I'd made the cake myself. My arm had been in a cast. I wasn't in the photo, click. Graduation photo. Callista and her sorority sisters, lined up in pastel gowns. Click. Thanksgiving 4 years ago. The entire family around the dining table, raising glasses. I remembered asking Vera, weeks earlier, if I could bring Gideon. "Sweetheart," she had said in that tone she used when she was pretending to be gentle, "Thanksgiving is just for the core family. You know how Dad feels about strangers." Strangers. That's what she'd called him. Click. A beach trip I hadn't been invited to. Click. Harland and Callista at a charity gala. Caption, "Proud Dunore legacy." Gideon and I? Nowhere. Not a single shot, not even in the background. It wasn't just a missed upload. It was an edit, a decision. I leaned toward Vera, who was seated on the couch next to Aunt Rachel. "I sent you photos," I said softly, "of me and Gideon, from last summer. You asked for them." She didn't meet my eyes. "Maybe Callista didn't get them in time," she replied. Then, after a pause, "Or maybe they didn't fit the tone." Fit the tone? That did it. The slideshow ended on a black screen with white text. "To the people who've always been there." Callista rose again. "And to my father, who has led this family with grace and purpose, may we continue building on the foundation he created." Harland stood, glass in hand. To the ones who stayed, the ones who showed up year after year. People clinked glasses. Someone shouted, "To family!" I stared at my untouched coffee. My reflection rippled on the surface. They weren't forgetting me. They were editing me out in real time. A curated version of the Dunore family. The one that smiled well in photos, told the same old jokes, and ignored anything too real to caption. I scanned the room. The same cousins who used to play tag with me under these chandeliers now avoided my gaze. The same aunts who once mailed me birthday cards now passed the dessert tray without acknowledging me. They weren't just erasing Gideon. They'd been trimming pieces of me for years, soft cuts, barely noticeable, until I looked up and realized the outline of my life didn't match what they chose to keep. I gripped the arms of the chair tighter. I'd spent years trying not to embarrass them, biting my tongue, making myself smaller so their world could stay in focus. But that world had no space for truth, and no space for me. Callista rose to her feet again, right as the last slide faded to black. She clinked her glass with the back of a spoon like she was hosting a corporate fundraiser instead of hijacking a family moment. "And now," she said, beaming toward the crowd, "a few words from the birthday girl." Heads turned toward me. I began to rise, drawing a breath, but she placed a hand on my shoulder and leaned in with that too sweet smile. "I'll speak for her. She gets all choked up anyway. Always has." The crowd chuckled. Someone actually said, "Bless her heart," as if I was some fragile houseplant. I sat back down, too stunned to react. She hadn't asked. She hadn't even paused. Callista stepped forward, lifted her glass, and looked around as if accepting a standing ovation. "Arielle's always been the dreamer of the family. Brilliant, whimsical, a little out there. Still waiting on that NASA tour, right?" Scattered laughter followed. I saw Uncle Rod nudge his wife, and Aunt Rachel raised her eyebrows with a smirk. She has the kind of imagination you can't teach, Callista continued, and tonight, we celebrate her, and whatever constellation her mind's orbiting. I couldn't even find a breath. When she finally stepped back, looking entirely too pleased with herself, all eyes came back to me. Some expectant, some pitying, none curious. I stood. My legs moved without consulting the rest of me. I walked up to the table, pulled the small, carefully wrapped box from beneath it, and handed it to my father. "A gift," I said, quiet but steady. "For your retirement." Harlan looked at it for a second too long, then accepted it with a polite nod. "Thank you, sweetheart." He didn't open it. He placed it beside his coffee like it was a napkin. Callista leaned over to Vera and muttered, "Not low enough." "Etsy, huh? Love that low-orbit charm." I heard her. So did half the room. Laughter bubbled again, smaller this time, more cautious. A few guests looked between us, unsure of the temperature. Vera touched my arm gently. "She didn't mean anything by it, honey. She's just... You know how she is." Yes. I did. For years I'd let her define me to this family. For years I'd watched her wrap her insults in lace and call it kindness. For years I'd swallowed it all. To keep peace, to stay small, to avoid making it worse. But something inside me had changed. Maybe it was the letter still in my purse. Maybe it was the missing slideshow photos. Or maybe it was just the simple, raw truth that I was tired of watching people pretend they didn't know what was happening. I walked up to the microphone. Callista's smile faltered. "I actually would like to say a few words," I said, facing the room. The volume dropped. Forks stopped clinking. No one interrupted. I looked at my sister, then at my father, and finally at the people seated in every corner of the room. The ones who had clapped along, laughed along, looked away every time something sharp was said. "This is my birthday," I began, my voice, my moment. A breath. Then I let the silence sit for a beat before continuing. "For years, she's spoken for me, told you I was shy, told you I was fragile, told you I was full of stories, and maybe I am. But the truth is, every time she spoke for me, she didn't protect me, she erased me." No one said a word. Callista's face was frozen in something between disbelief and fury, the kind you feel when a spotlight turns without permission. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. I just said what needed saying. "That ends tonight." And then I stepped back from the microphone, the weight in my chest somehow lighter. Not gone, but lighter. I didn't look at her again. I didn't have to. Let them sit with that. The applause never came. No one clapped. Just an awkward shuffling of feet and a few forced sips from champagne flutes. I stepped away from the mic and back toward my seat, but I didn't sit. I couldn't. My skin buzzed with something between adrenaline and clarity. A server passed by with a tray of coffee and petite fours, pretending not to notice the tension hanging above the room like stale perfume. I took a coffee, though I wasn't thirsty, and held it just to give my hands something to do. The party moved again. People drifted from the main hall to the open space near the fireplace. Dessert plates clinked. Jazz hummed softly through the speakers. The program booklets, printed on heavy, gold-trimmed cardstock, were passed out next. "Program?" a cousin offered, handing me one. I accepted it without thinking and scanned the pages. Page 1, cover art of Callista and Harlan from the gala. Page 2, family timeline with milestones, births, weddings, anniversaries. Page 3, speakers and reflections. And there it was. Or rather, there it wasn't. No mention of me. No happy birthday, Arielle. Not even a bullet point. The only name under closing toast, Callista Dunore. Even the line about Dad's retirement said, "Words from Callista and Harlan." I blinked slowly. The paper trembled in my grip. How do you forget the person whose name is on the cake? I didn't have much time to dwell before Uncle Rod wandered over, cup of decaf in hand, cheeks flushed from too many brandies. He leaned in with a conspiratorial grin. "You remember that fella from church camp?" Jacob something? I didn't answer, but that didn't stop him. Well, he's single now, twice divorced, but he's settled. Real estate guy, drives a Lexus. Maybe it's time to be a little more realistic, huh? I gave him a tight-lipped smile. The kind you give when you're trying not to throw the drink in your hand across the room. Before I could respond, Callista materialized beside him like a bad draft. Someone who understands the family, right? She said. Not one of these space cowboys. She didn't say Gideon's name. She didn't have to. The sneer in her voice was loud enough. I set my coffee down on a side table, took a step closer, not backing away like I usually did. You can joke about my career, about him, about me, I said, calm and direct. But don't mistake my silence for shame. It's not. It's knowing the room too well to waste breath on it. A few heads turned. Aunt Rachel raised her brows. Uncle Rod blinked. Callista gave a thin-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. You're being sensitive. I didn't flinch. No, I'm being honest. You should try it. I left them standing there and walked to the front of the room, where the printed program was mounted on a foam board easel like a trophy. I pulled a Sharpie from the table next to it, probably left out for guest notes, and uncapped it slowly. In clean, deliberate handwriting, I added a name beneath the closing toast. Arielle Burrow, finally unedited. I stepped back. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. A few clapped, unsure if it was appropriate. Others avoided looking at me altogether. Callista said nothing, but the vein at her temple twitched, and her hand gripped her wineglass tighter than it needed to. I didn't linger. I returned to my spot, retrieved my coffee, and took a sip that tasted far too cold for how hot my face felt. But I didn't feel humiliated. Not anymore. I felt whole. For the first time in a long while, I didn't care if they approved. I wasn't asking for a seat at their table. I'd brought my own chair and carved my name into the side. I stayed where I was for a while after writing my name in Sharpie. No one told me to erase it. No one dared. I let the buzz of the crowd settle into something quieter, something unsure. Then came the call for the family photo. Callista's voice rang through the room, crisp and polished, like she'd been practicing for a televised speech. All right, let's gather by the arch. Parents in the middle, siblings on the sides, spouses next to their partners. Chairs scraped, shoes clicked, and the energy shifted again. One of those subtle yet sharp movements that made clear. This was a moment for appearances, not honesty. I didn't move. I watched them start to arrange themselves out near the garden arch, where the lanterns were strung. The photographer adjusted his light stand. Tripod, flash check. He looked eager to wrap up and head home. Where's Arielle? Someone called out. I heard Callista's response as I stood near a pillar just inside the house. Calm. Pleasant. She stepped away. Let's keep going. No one challenged her. A cousin near the drinks table shrugged at me, his mouth full of cake. Guess they forgot. I gave him a look that didn't need words, because we both knew forgetting wasn't the issue. I stayed back, arms crossed, watching them pose beneath strings of warm lights. They looked like a Christmas card, perfectly arranged, deliberately hollow. And then I saw a figure emerge from the edge of the yard. Gideon. He wasn't supposed to come. I hadn't asked him to. After everything that happened, after the envelope I found, I thought I'd protected him by keeping him away. But there he was. No grand entrance. Just that slow, measured walk of someone who knew exactly where he was headed. He wore a dark blazer, open at the collar. In one hand was a simple gift bag. The chatter dimmed as heads turned. Who's that? Someone whispered. Gideon didn't stop. He walked right past the posing family, past the glowing arch, and straight to where I stood. He met my eyes, handed me the bag gently, and said, "Thought this belonged here." No dramatic speech, no confrontation, just truth, standing in front of them all. Inside the bag was a framed copy of his NASA badge, encased in glass, with a photo of us at the lab. taken 6 months ago during a late-night systems test. I swallowed a breath and stepped forward. The group under the arch froze. The photographer hesitated. I walked up to the display table Callista had used for her speech notes earlier and placed the framed badge right in the center. I didn't say a word. No one else did either. Flash. The camera went off, catching the photo just as Harlan looked over his shoulder, lips parted, but no sound leaving him. The next flash caught Vera staring at the badge. Her hand hovered at her throat like she was adjusting a necklace that wasn't there. Callista didn't move, didn't even blink. I could see it all on her face, though. The confusion, the panic, the calculation. She wasn't worried about the badge. She was worried about the picture, about what it captured, and what it said. For once, she wasn't in control of the narrative. Harlan cleared his throat. Vera looked away. A few of the cousins shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between me and the photo. I turned to Gideon, who still hadn't said anything. He didn't need to. He squeezed my hand once, and in that one gesture, I knew I hadn't imagined any of it. I hadn't made him up. I hadn't dreamed a partner who supported me. He was real, and now so was my place in the story. We stepped back together. I didn't return to the group photo. I didn't need to. The camera flashed again without me in the frame. And this time, I was the one who chose to be out of it. The moment didn't explode. It didn't shatter or collapse. It simply lingered. Not because it demanded attention, but because nobody seemed to know what to do next. There wasn't a script for this kind of thing. Not at a garden party, not with the wine half poured, and the birthday candles still waiting to be lit. The music, soft jazz piped through the patio speakers, felt jarringly out of place now. It kept playing, oblivious to the fracture unfolding beneath its notes, like a soundtrack that refused to acknowledge the plot twist. I was still holding Gideon's hand when he gave it one last, deliberate squeeze, something final but not bitter. A quiet thank you, a silent promise not to speak for me, just to stand beside me for as long as I needed. Then, without a word, he stepped back. His presence had said enough, probably more than anything I could have summoned from a microphone. He took a few steps toward the garden gate, but paused. Slowly, almost thoughtfully, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. He pulled out something I hadn't seen in years. A framed photograph, clean and sharp. The two of us standing shoulder to shoulder in front of the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the official logo stamped in the bottom corner. Our visitor badges clipped neatly to our shirts, arms around each other, proud, young, certain of the work we'd done, of the space we belonged in. It wasn't just a picture, it was proof, a timestamp, a receipt for the years I'd poured into something that mattered, to me, to science, to the world. Even if it had never mattered to them. He walked to the dessert table, where the untouched birthday cake still sat, its frosting pristine, its candles waiting for a wish that would never be made. Without a flourish, without saying a single thing, Gideon placed the framed photo beside the cake, like it was just another part of the centerpiece. But it wasn't. It was a stake in the ground, a quiet line drawn. Then he turned back toward me, met my eyes, and gave the smallest of nods. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just enough. He walked out through the garden gate. No slamming door, no dramatic farewell, just the soft rustle of leaves and the quiet click of the latch as it closed behind him. A sentence, finely punctuated. The silence he left behind didn't fill with noise. It just deepened. A new kind of silence. Not the absence of sound, but the weight of something unspoken hanging in the air. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Callista. Her lips parted like she was about to say something, but nothing came. Her fingers gripped the stem of her wineglass a little too tightly, turning it slowly between her palms. I could see it, her brain trying to catch up, to organize the chaos, to decide whether it was too late to play innocent or try to apologize. Vera sat stiffly. She reached for the napkin in her lap, dabbed the corner of her mouth, though there was nothing there. Then she folded the napkin, unfolded it, folded it again. Her hands needed something to do. Her eyes stayed down. Harland, next to her, leaned in and whispered something low, something just for her. I didn't catch the words, but I knew the tone. That shift, that subtle pivot from dismissal to dawning recognition. Maybe, we should have asked more. I stepped forward slowly, not rushing the moment. I wasn't here to shame anyone. I wasn't here to reclaim the spotlight. I didn't even raise my voice. I just stepped into the space where everything had gone still, and I spoke, because silence had cost me too much to let it take anything more. I reached the dessert table and picked up the photo frame. The glass caught the string lights overhead, casting soft, flickering reflections across the patio and onto the faces of the people watching. Tiny, scattered glints, like stars in a sky no one had bothered to look up at until now. "You didn't believe me," I said, my voice calm, clear. "You didn't have to." I turned to Callista, held her gaze. "But NASA did." She didn't flinch, but she didn't blink either. "This," I held up the frame so they could all see it clearly, "wasn't about proving a point. It wasn't about making you apologize, or trying to win some imaginary fight." I paused, let the silence breathe. "It was about reclaiming a part of me you tried to erase, the part you told yourselves wasn't real, or wasn't serious, or wasn't enough." I turned to my parents. Harland had leaned back in his chair, arms folded, but not in defiance, just distance. His eyes weren't sharp with judgment anymore, just tired. Vera, beside him, looked away the instant my eyes found hers. "I won't be in your slideshows," I said, "but I won't be in your shadows either." I stepped forward and placed the photograph back on the table, but this time I centered it. Right in the middle, facing outward, not tucked into the decor, not hidden like a footnote, centered, visible. There was a stir, a few subtle movements. A throat cleared. Someone shifted in their seat like they wanted to stand, or leave, or say something, anything. But no one did. No one stopped me. I turned, walked toward the French doors. My heels clicked softly against the stone tiles. The rhythm felt steady, grounded, certain. Behind me, the garden stayed still. No one followed. The night air met me like an exhale. Not a relief exactly, but close, like the first breath after you've been holding one too long. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't collapse into some dramatic heap in the front seat of my car. I didn't even look back, because this wasn't about walking out. It was about not needing permission to leave anymore. By the time I reached the guest house, the crickets had taken over where the jazz music left off. I slipped off my shoes by the front door, exhaled for what felt like the first time all night, and let the silence settle. Not the kind that's heavy or haunted, just quiet, clean. I didn't bother unpacking. My suitcase stayed by the door, half zipped, half folded, just like the part of me that still hadn't decided what to do next. But I knew one thing. I wouldn't be returning to the house. That chapter had closed with a soft click, and I had no desire to reopen it for an epilogue that wouldn't change a thing. Morning came slowly, as if it didn't want to interrupt. The light through the window was soft, gray. Charleston's humidity had calmed for once, leaving only the stillness behind. I brewed a cup of coffee in the tiny kitchenette and stepped onto the porch, wrapping the mug in both hands. The steam rose lazily, curling into the quiet like it had nowhere urgent to be. That made two of us. A knock broke the calm. I opened the door to see Delaney, barefoot, hair a mess, holding a folded piece of paper in both hands, like it might dissolve if she squeezed too tight. "I drew something," she said. I opened it carefully. Crayon on printer paper. A stick figure version of me, with wild hair and a blue jumpsuit. Behind me was a giant rocket, complete with stars and the word NASA scribbled across the bottom. "My mom says we're not supposed to talk about last night," she added, eyes downcast. "But I think your job is cool." I knelt down and hugged her. Not for too long, just enough to say, without saying it, that I heard her. Thanks, sweetheart, I whispered. She nodded once, serious, then turned and ran off toward the house before anyone could catch her there. I sat back on the porch with the drawing on my lap and my coffee cooling beside me. It didn't sting. Not like it would have a year ago. Not even like it would have last week. My phone buzzed. A message from one of my cousins. No words, just a link. I tapped it and watched the slideshow from last night load on the screen. The same one Callista had narrated with her practiced charm. I watched every second of it. Photos of birthdays, trips, toasts. Voices in the background laughing over inside jokes I hadn't been part of. Faces carefully selected to paint the Dunore family as perfect, close, unshakable. Not a single image of me. Not from childhood. Not college. Not one with Gideon. Not one alone. Before, that would have knocked the air out of me. Today? It confirmed what I already knew. They hadn't forgotten me. They had chosen to crop me out. And maybe that's why it didn't hurt anymore, because finally, I wasn't surprised. I opened my photo album, found the picture of Gideon and me from NASA, the same one he'd framed and left behind. I snapped a shot of it resting on my nightstand in the guest house, soft light catching the glass just right. Then, I texted it to him with a single line. They didn't give it space. I'm giving it meaning. I didn't need him to reply. I didn't need more proof. He already showed up, in every way that mattered. By mid-morning, I'd loaded the car. The drawing from Delaney was tucked inside my journal, the photo frame wrapped in a towel and wedged between the seats. As I pulled away from the driveway, I caught one last glimpse of the Dunore estate in the rearview mirror. The shutters, the white trim, the manicured hedges, all still as polished as ever. But it didn't feel like mine anymore. It never really had. I didn't feel bitterness, just space. And in that space, the quiet kind of strength that doesn't shout or shake the table, it just exists. Because I hadn't been erased. I'd simply stopped waiting for someone else to write me in.